KCAAradio.com.
KCAA.
Do you believe in a God that satisfies? Do you believe in a God that opens eyes? Do you believe in a God that tells you lies? Or do you believe in me? Do you believe in a God that brings you down? Do you believe in a God that wears the ground? Do you believe in a God that makes you bow? Or do you believe in me? Do you believe in a God that satisfies? Do you believe in a God that opens eyes? Do you believe in a God that tells you lies? Or do you believe in me? Do you believe in a God that brings you down? Do you believe in a God that wears the ground? Do you believe in a God that makes you bow? Or do you believe in me?
It's Beyond Common Sense. It's Lanny Sense with Lanny Swerdlow, KCAA's resident gay, woke, liberal, pot-smoking, race-mixing, tree-hugging, left-handed, science-affirming, Jewish, humanist, atheist, a white evangelical Christian nationalist, worst nightmare.
Welcome to Lanny Sense. I am so glad you are joining us here tonight. We've got a great show tonight. We're very fortunate to have Linda Castro, who is the public relations. Linda Castro from Cal Wild, and she serves as the Assistant Policy Director, and she's going to be talking about the Chuckwalla National Monument. It is a wonderful thing that's coming here to the Inland Empire, and you've got to hear about it, and you'll hear about it right here on tonight's episode of Lanny Sense. Before we get to that, though, I want to tell you about a bill that's in the California State Legislature, AB 1755, which has passed the State Assembly and is now going to the State Senate. Let me give you the background on what this bill is about and why it is important that it gets passed. This is a bill that will allow cannabis dispensaries that have lounges to provide regular food and regular beverages, non-alcoholic beverages, to their patrons, and also to have live entertainment, singers, musicians, and this kind of stuff. Anyways, put them into competition, you might say, with alcoholic bars and taverns. Why is this important? Well, let's take a look at it. It's Saturday night, and you and your friends want to party at one of the clubs with live bands and or DJs spinning the latest hits. You smoke a doobie or two in your car and head on in and find yourself surrounded by people dancing, partying, and drinking. What a downer. Drunkenness, lewd behavior, diminished inhibitions, vomiting, and loss of consciousness are some of the more common results of public alcohol consumption. A recent study found a correlation between where alcohol is sold and where instances of violence, crime take place. What our communities need are clubs and businesses where people can consume cannabis for socialization, celebration, joviality, and exhilaration. Whatever problems the cannabis may cause pale to insignificance when compared to alcohol. In fact, studies regarding where cannabis is sold have shown a decrease in crime. In every state that has legalized the recreational use of cannabis, the regulations for on-site consumption of cannabis at businesses like restaurants or clubs are so Byzantine and complex that they are nearly impossible to comply with if they are allowed to do so at all. This is beyond absurd. Commercial outlets for the on-site consumption of cannabis should be allowed in the same way commercial outlets are allowed for the on-site consumption of alcohol. The health and safety advantages of the individual and the community for providing on-site consumption businesses for cannabis are enormous. To understand this, it needs to be recognized that people like to alter their state of consciousness. Humans have been doing that for so long, there's probably a genetic component for wanting to do so. Alcohol has generally been the chosen adulterant to accomplish achieving this state. The choice has been a disaster of epic proportions. 100,000 deaths a year, significant health-related harms such as pancreatitis, cirrhosis of the liver, cardiovascular disease, cancer, fetal alcohol syndrome, all compounded by mental health problems literally beyond comprehension. Then there are the social problems resulting in domestic and random violence along with sexual assault, decimated families, drunken driving, and loss of productivity. These affect not just the individual, but their families and the entire community with the cost of almost $250 billion each year, according to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Cannabis is the polar opposite of alcohol. Essentially, no negative health-related concerns along with serenity in place of violence, awareness instead of inhibition, and open-mindedness replacing intolerance. Compared to alcohol, overconsumption of inhaled cannabis is practically non-existent, with far fewer consequences when someone inhales more than they are used to. High-quality cannabis can make an evening with the friends far more enjoyable, more stimulating, and way more fun than alcohol ever can. Whether it is a concert, a movie, a theatrical production, a dance party, or just getting together for a friend's house, there is nothing better than cannabis for celebration, socialization, and consciousness altering. Unlike the classic next day hangover associated with even moderate alcohol consumption, the morning after a night of cannabis consumption, no matter how heavy, finds the reveler waking up well rested, bright eyed, and bushy tailed, ready to get on with the day's activation. It should be noted, though, that cannabis consumption with alcohol consumption at the same time should be as verboten as alcohol consumption alone. Consuming cannabis with alcohol can lead to even worse behavior, as cannabis amplifies and exaggerates the negative behaviors associated with alcohol use. For good reason, California's initiative legalizing marijuana specifically bans the consumption of cannabis and alcohol in the same business. So what can you do to make this happen? Well, there's AB 1775, sponsored by Assemblymember Haney. This bill will allow cannabis businesses to that have licensed dispensaries, that have consumption lounges, to provide non-medicated, food with no cannabis in it, and non-medicated, no cannabis in it beverages. They cannot provide alcohol beverages. They'll be able to have live entertainment and sell tickets. In other words, instead of going to a bar and having alcohol as the social lubricant for the evening of dancing or performances or whatever, they use cannabis. So give your state senator a call. Tell them to vote yes on AB 1775. If you don't know who your state senator is, go to Google or DuckDuckGo and type in "Find My State Senator in California," and it'll bring you up with a website where you just put in your address and bingo, there's your state senator. You can give them an email or send them a call and tell them to vote for AB 1755. Okay. Well, we're going to switch gears totally now. We are so fortunate to have as our guest tonight Linda Castro, Policy Director for Cal Wild. She's going to be speaking on the Chuckwalla National Monument, which will protect lands adjacent to Joshua Tree National Park, one of the most wonderful national parks here in the United States, and improve access to nature, honor cultural landscapes, protect biodiversity, and conserve wildlife habitat. In 2014, Linda joined Cal Wild and now serves as the Assistant Policy Director. She is based in Southern California. Linda was, as she puts it, a military brat who lived in Europe and South America for a significant portion of her childhood before arriving in Texas. She obtained her bachelor's degree from Trinity University in San Antonio and then moved to California and obtained her Juris Doctor degree from Whittier Law School. She practiced law for years while volunteering her time with and serving on the board of a Santa Clara-based nonprofit that works to protect and restore wild places and rivers in Southern California. Some of Linda's most significant accomplishments with Cal Wild include the approval of DRECP. She'll have to tell us what that is in 2016. The designation of the Mojave Trails National Monument in 2016, and the passage of the John D. Dingell Conservation and Restoration Act of 2019. Linda lives right near us here in Yucca Valley and is an avid tent camper, backpacker, and hiker, so I could not think of a better person to bring on our show right now to talk about this amazing thing that's going to be happening, the creation of the Chuckwalla National Monument. Linda, welcome to the show.
Hi, Lanny. Thank you very much.
Oh, well, we are so excited to have you. You know, I was hearing about the Chuckwalla for about a year or so, and then I ran across an article saying there's going to be a big event, so I'd like to talk about it. But let's talk a little bit about you first. How did you come to want to be active in protecting wildlife and conservation of our lands?
Well, I think it went back to when I was a child and I would go camping and hiking with family members. I got involved with Girl Scouts, started, really, I'm hearing echoing, really enjoying the outdoors. Coming to California, I discovered something that I hadn't experienced before because I hadn't lived in a Western state, and that was public lands. and the fact that our federal government manages millions of acres in our state and some of the western states. And that first started piquing my interest when I first moved to California. And then when I started volunteering for a local nonprofit that did some work on federal public lands. And I was lucky enough to have this job literally fall into my lap. And I was able to leave the practice of law, something that I had been wanting to do, and I now have my dream job.
I could not think of a more rewarding avocation than protecting wildlife and protecting our natural resources here. And that's what you're doing with Cal Wild. Could you tell us a little bit about Cal Wild, what the organization is and what they do?
Sure. So it's a rather small California nonprofit. We began working on conservation issues in 1976. We were previously known as the California Wilderness Coalition, and then we changed our name a few years ago to better reflect our current mission. We do more than just wilderness. Our headquarters are in Oakland, and then we just have a handful of staff that work throughout the state. And as you mentioned, I'm based in Yucca Valley. Generally speaking, we work to protect the wildest remaining places and waters in California. We focus on lands that are managed by the U.S. Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management. Not to say that we don't care about National Park Service, but usually we work with other groups and support them when it comes to the National Park Service lands. We find that there aren't enough groups focused on the Forest Service and BLM. And we do that through a number of ways. We get involved with legislative and national monument campaigns. We get involved with land use planning processes that the Forest Service and the BLM or Bureau of Land Management initiates for those lands that they manage. And we defend against proposed ill-conceived projects on those lands, such as you may have heard about a proposed cyanide heap leach open pit gold mine near the doorstep of Death Valley National Park. So all those types of things are things that we get involved in.
No, I did not. That is very cyanide.
Cyanide, which is used to take the gold out of the surrounding rock or whatever. Yeah,
oh my God.
It's not a good thing.
No,
we're a small organization, but I would say we're also pretty mighty. We've been involved in pretty much every legislative campaign that's resulted in wilderness being designated since 1976, pretty much every national monument campaign on BLM and U.S. Forest Service lands. And I'm not saying we do it alone. We work with partners, some very important and dedicated partners. But we work really hard and we work throughout the state. And I have some very wonderful, dedicated coworkers.
Before we get to the Chuck Wall National Monument, why is it important that we protect our open spaces? A lot of people say, "Oh no, we need to mine them and use them and all this kind of." Why do we need to protect open spaces and keep them as they are?
Ooh, there are a lot of reasons. One that immediately comes to mind is climate change. Climate change is forcing a lot of the species to go to higher ground so that they can survive, so that they don't become extinct. We've already destroyed so much habitat and so much connectivity for these animals to move around with all of the development that we've already done. Open space is important for those of us who have stressful jobs. It's time for us to get mental health issues dealt with and physical health, getting exercise. If everything is developed, there's nowhere for us to go. Clean air, clean water. There's just so many reasons.
It's amazing. I mean, it just makes common sense, but there's a lot of people out there that don't feel we need to protect these open space. They should be exploited and this kind of stuff. So the kind of work that you are doing is so essential, because I think most people are with you. They believe in the importance of protecting our land. So let's talk a bit about this Chuckwalla National Monument. How did this, it's going to be right next door to one of the crown jewels of the national park system, Joshua Tree National Park. What is Chuckwalla National Monument going to do? What's it all about?
Well, the proposal includes two aspects. One is designating a new national monument that would consist of about 620,000 acres that would be called the Chuckwalla National Monument. That would consist of lands that are currently being managed by the Bureau of Land Management, and it would stay under their management. The other is a separate proposal to expand Joshua Tree National Park by about 17,000 acres. That is on the northeastern part of Joshua Tree National Park. And then, since I can't show you a map, when it comes to the new monument, the Chuckwalla National Monument, generally speaking, where that would be located is between the Salton Sea and the Colorado River. And then, generally speaking, I-10 is a northern boundary, although there are some parts of the boundary that jut up north of I-10. And then the southern boundary generally is a marine base called the Chocolate Mountain Aerial Gunnery Range.
Is that down by the Salton Sea?
So the Salton Sea would be off to the west, and then so it would be to the south of the proposed monument.
Okay, wow, that's 600,000 plus acres. That's a good size chunk of land, and it's gonna.
It is.
How big is Joshua Tree compared to the proposed Chuckwalla National Monument?
That's a good question. If you look at it on the map, it looks similar in size, maybe. It's hard to say. I don't know. I don't want to guess.
But it's about the same size. But they're continuous, so you could walk directly from Joshua Tree into Chuckwalla. Is that correct?
No,
they're not contiguous.
I-10 is in the way. So you might be thinking of the expansion. So the expansion of the park, yes, would be contiguous. So that is in the northeastern part of the park. Chuckwalla is primarily located south of I-10, and Joshua Tree National Park is primarily, it is located north of I-10. Okay. So I-10 would sort of be a boundary line.
So I had this, so for some reason I had this impression that they're right next to you, but they're completely separate. And you're protecting a whole new area that hasn't been protected with the creation of Chuckwalla National Monument.
Right.
Okay, that's wonderful. Now, the name Chuckwalla, tell us about the name.
Well, there is the iconic lizard that lives there, the Chuckwalla. As a matter of fact, not too long ago, I took a group out hiking in the proposed monument, and a Chuckwalla, which normally they hide in the rocks, walked out and basically posed for photos for everyone, which was just amazing. It was a lot of fun. But it was the name that was already in existence in the area with a couple of existing wilderness areas. There's the Chuckwalla Mountains Wilderness, as well as the Little Chuckwalla Mountains Wilderness. And then the valley between those two wilderness areas, both of which were designated in 1994. The valley in between is called the Chuckwalla Valley. And so it made sense. And as we were trying, we initially just had a, proposed monument, TBD, name TBD. Some of the first outreach that we did as we started working on this campaign was to the tribes. And we wanted to know if they thought that that was a good name or if they had any other suggestions. And all the answers were, no, that sounds good to us. The word does come from what I've read from two different languages, from two local tribes. I wouldn't even begin to try to pronounce them. But so there are at least, some indigenous roots to that word. But then I guess it was modified somewhat by the Spanish, and now it's become Chuckwalla.
Okay, well now Joshua Tree has some spectacular areas. There's Hidden Canyon and so on. Is there some special spectacular places that are going to be especially attractive to people in the Chuckwalla National Monument?
I'm sorry, you cut out a little bit. Can you say that question again?
Absolutely, I can say it again. Let me think if I can remember it. Yes. Joshua Tree is known for some other very spectacular places like Hidden Canyon and so on. Is there some very special places in Chuckwalla National that people are going to really want to hike out to and see?
There are a few that I can think of. First one, and a lot of people are probably already aware of it, is an area called Painted Canyon, which is off of Box Canyon Road. First of all, just driving on Box Canyon Road, if you're not a hiker or if it's too hot outside or something, Box Canyon Road is just beautiful. The scenery is just amazing. It's a paved road, so anybody can drive on it. And then that goes to Painted Canyon, which is a dirt road and dead ends at this beautiful canyon. And you can just do a regular hike, or someone has put in ladders that you can climb up the rocks. And it's hard to explain, but anyway, a lot of people enjoy that. A little bit more of a risk there, but still fun.
Painted
There are some other hikes,
Yeah,
and then one of my favorite, it's not a hike, but it's a place to stay, and that's Corn Springs Campground, although maybe I shouldn't share that too widely, which is on the other side of the monument. The Painted Canyon is on the western side, and then Corn Springs Campground is closer to Blythe. Beautiful campground with native California fan palms or desert palms, and just dark night skies, and it's just beautiful.
You know, Painted Canyon, Box Canyon is going to be part of the new Chuckwalla National Monument.
Right.
That is wonderful, because that's a very popular area, and it needs to be watched over and protected. So it's wonderful that that's going to become part of Chuckwalla National Monument, because it's going to get the protection that it really needs and deserves.
Yes.
Is there any special endemic plants or animals to Chuckwalla?
Oh, there are quite a few. I am not a botanist, so I will probably screw this up, but there are a number of rare plants. The Mecca aster, I recall, is one of them. Munz's choya, Munz' choya. There are others that I cannot think of. The area has a lot of biodiversity when it comes to plants. Last I saw, a scientist had already seen, I want to say it was like 158 different plants in the region. Now, not all of them are very rare, but some of them are, like the Mecca aster is quite rare. So that's one of the reasons why we were, looking at this area to provide higher protections. When it comes to animals, the Chuckwalla is not rare. It's just adorable. But some of the things that are rare, there are, I always forget what they're called, burrow deer that live there. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife also plans to reintroduce the Sonoran pronghorn that previously was there before, people either killed them all off or made them go elsewhere. A significant portion of the lands are critical habitat. It's identified by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, critical habitat for the desert tortoise. As we've seen in other stories, the tortoise is having a really tough time. It keeps declining in numbers, despite the fact that it's been on the Endangered Species Act list for quite some time, both state as well as federal. These lands have been identified as critically important to the continued survival of the desert tortoise.
Well, now we've gone over why Chuckwalla National Monument is so important for open space, protection of animals, for visitors to come and enjoy the scenery and the quiet and the beautiful countryside. So let's talk about how it's going to happen. So how did this project get started?
Sure. Well, first of all, before I even talk about this particular project, I think I want to mention that conservationists have long recognized the numerous values that these lands hold and have wanted to see better protections and management for those values. But unfortunately, that desire, that recognition never resulted in any goals being reached. This particular campaign, I would say, was started in early 2019 by two organizations, Mojave Desert Land Trust, they're headquartered in Joshua Tree, and Cal Wild. And after having some discussions and realizing that both of our organizations wanted to focus a lot of our time and resources into getting a campaign started for this region, we began to reach out to other people and other organizations from the region to find out if they thought the campaign was a good idea. And after getting a number of thumbs up, we really started working on, bringing people together, talking about what are our goals, what are we trying to protect, what areas are we thinking about, starting to draw maps, just trying to think all that through. So bottom line, after all that explanation, I would say it began in early 2019. And at this point, our coalition, which we now have the name called Protect California Desert Coalition, that coalition has grown significantly from the, handful of groups that we really started off with, in those first gatherings. I think we're about 25 organizations at this point. We've got local groups such as Friends of the Desert Mountains, Cactus to Cloud Institute, COFEM, which I can never remember what that stands for. It's a Spanish name, but it's something like Council of Mexican Federation. I can't remember now. I know I'm going to screw that one up. Sorry. State groups such as California Native Plant Society, Audubon California, and Cal Wild. And then national groups like Sierra Club, Latino Outdoors, and Vet Voice Foundation.
Well, you certainly are putting a large coalition of organizations together to make this happen. So what is the process now? You want to make this happen. You've got this groups to do it. What do they have to do?
Well, the big thing is garner support. Talk to electeds, talk to various people who use the lands, talk to people who live in communities nearby, just talk to people about what are their concerns, what are their desires. And so that's really where we began. And the first place we began were with the tribes that had cultural affiliations with the lands. 13 tribal nations have cultural affiliations with these lands. As of today, 6 of them have provided us with a letter of support or resolution of support. And then we continue to work with all tribes that are interested in moving this forward. And some have interest, but just don't have the resources or the time to dedicate to it. We've been working on, for example, first of all, Representative Ruiz. That was the first person to try and get on board with us because we needed the representative of that district to be willing to introduce legislation. He did that last fall, I believe that was. Yeah, I think it was last September. He introduced legislation. Since that time, we've been working on, getting more support. We have gotten support from City of Palm Springs, Cathedral City, Indian Wells, Indio, Desert Hot Springs, Banning. We've gotten support from a number of historical societies because there are a number of historical values to the lands that we're talking about. More than 100 small businesses in the Coachella Valley so far. Visit Greater Palm Springs. So anyway, we kept working on getting that support, and then our next step was to find a Senate champion, and that is now Senator Padilla. Senator Padilla introduced legislation a couple of months ago. I think it was a couple months ago. So we now have legislation introduced in both the House and the Senate. And then more recently, we were able to host a visit from Department of Interior Secretary Deb Haaland. Sorry, I'm losing my voice for some reason. She came out, was it last week? The weekend before, had a meeting with all of the culturally affiliated tribes, had a meeting with a number of electeds and conservation groups and a number of groups, including Cal Wild. Yay, I was able to to go to that meeting and sit next to Secretary Holland, which was a very exciting thing for me.
Would be for anybody.
And pardon?
I said meeting with Deb Holland would be for anybody. You know, she's Native American, and I couldn't think of a better person to be in charge of our Department of Interior than a Native American, because they know about the importance of caring for our lands.
Absolutely. And then for me, I see her as a role model because she's a woman and she's an attorney and she's done some really amazing things. So,
yes.
So anyway, yeah. So it was really wonderful. And then our next step, and I think this is really important for your listeners, our next important milestone is a public meeting that I don't know that much about, other than to say it's coming soon. So based on the other national monument campaigns that have recently gone before us that have resulted in a monument designation, we know that BLM will hold a public meeting somewhere near the proposed monument, and will invite the public to come and make comments. We don't know exactly where that's going to be, like I said, but given that the Coachella Valley is the closest area to the proposed monument, we would expect it to be in the Coachella Valley, maybe even in the eastern Coachella Valley, since that's the closest to the proposal. We don't know when. We sort of have an inkling that it might be in the next couple of months, but we really don't know. And unfortunately, they don't give us a lot of heads up, at least based on what has happened with prior national monument campaigns. We literally get like a week's notice.
So you have to be ready to go at a drop of a hat, just practically. You got to have your coalition, everybody ready to be, you send them an email, you give them a phone call, and they're going to show up.
Exactly. So, there's really, one way that folks could keep track of that. We have a coalition website called protectchuckwalla.org, where people can check for there's news posted there. We're also on social media. And if you go onto that protectchuckwalla.org, it'll give you all the various, Facebook, Instagram, all those things. It'll give you the way to follow us on that, and that will give you the news. The other possibility is I believe if you sign the petition on that website, it will also then put you on an email list to give you notice of any events or anything that comes up. And then also our members, Cal Wild members, are going to be getting an email from me as soon as possible when we find out about the meeting notice. And so for that, I'm trying to think of what the best way would be to, I'll just give my email address, and then for anybody who wants to get more information or join Cal Wild as a member, my email address is lcastro@calwild.org.
That's easy to remember. L. Castro at Cal Wild, that's CALWILD.org, right?
Yes.
Okay, you've talked about all these people and groups and stuff supporting it. Is there any opposition to Chuckwalla National Monument being created?
There is, and I think it would be unusual if there were, zero people in opposition. I would say in general, most of the opposition that we've received or that we've heard about is primarily along ideological and political grounds. So those who don't like President Biden or have a different political belief than the current administration, those who dislike the federal government, no matter who's in charge, or they dislike the fact that the federal government manages public lands in our state. Those who distrust the Bureau of Land Management, who think that all they're going to do is just, they're going to turn it into a national monument and then they're just going to shut it down to people and no one will be able to go. So you get a lot of those types of people. And unfortunately, with that type of opposition, there really isn't anything that you could say to make them feel any differently. You could argue facts all day long, and it would just fall on deaf ears. There's also a good amount of opposition, not necessarily based on politics or ideology, but oftentimes just from a misunderstanding of what we're trying to accomplish, or one person who's misinformed sharing their incorrect information with someone else, and it's like a rumor mill or whatever, and things start spreading that aren't true. I will say that we've done a lot of outreach to industries, I guess that's what you would call it, who might otherwise be opposed. So, for example, the solar industry is not opposed. The Metropolitan Water District is not opposed. Southern California Edison is not opposed. All of them, because we met with them, addressed any concerns that they might have had. I would say, in thinking about opposition, the only fact-based opposition that I can think of is from people who would want to own mining claims in the future. One of the protections we're seeking as part of this monument proposal or expansion of Joshua Tree National Park, we're seeking what's called a mineral withdrawal. So that is a permanent prohibition on future mining claims. And while that's really intended to prohibit large industrial scale mines, it would also apply to individuals and very small mining claims. Existing claims on the BLM lands would generally remain valid so long as they weren't being used for commercial purposes. But those in the Joshua Tree expansion area would likely have difficulty keeping existing claims. So those are the folks that have, hey, you're taking my right to mine away. And while that is factual, it is a relatively small group, and it's unfortunate. I mean, everyone should be able to enjoy their preferred activity, but there's just no way to say, well, if you're, huge corporation, sorry, you don't get to do it, but if you're small person, you do get to do it.
It doesn't quite work that way. Say, now you mentioned the solar industry. Because I understand in some protected national monuments, they've allowed solar panels to be installed. Will this be allowed in Chuckwalla?
No, one of our goals is to have a prohibition on renewable energy development within the monument. There are a lot of lands. I don't know if you've been on I-10 out in that area recently, but there's a lot of solar panels out there already. And there are still a lot of lands that the Bureau of Land Management has specifically identified that they believe that renewable energy development should not only be prioritized, but also incentivized. And that goes back to, and I cannot believe that I'm actually even talking about this, the DRECP that you mentioned at the beginning of in my introduction.
Right.
That was a very large land use plan that was done by the Bureau of Land Management, completed over almost a decade, and it was finalized in 2016. And the point of that was to try to strike a balance of renewable energy, conservation, and recreation throughout the California desert on BLM public lands. And so the BLM, through hundreds of public meetings and just so much work, identified a lot of those lands out there as being appropriate for renewable energy development, but also identified a significant amount of the lands within our proposed monument as appropriate for conservation.
Okay. Well, now, most of these lands are BLM lands now, right? Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. How does the management of the Chuckwalla National Monument going to differ from how the BLM manages these lands now?
So one of the things as I already mentioned, is it would provide a permanent prohibition on future mineral development. I say future because if there is an existing valid claim, so long as the person or entity holding the claim can go through this involved process, which I don't exactly understand, and it would be way too complicated for this conversation. But anyway, they may be able to proceed with a legal right that they already have. Let's put it that way. But it would be a complete prohibition on future mineral development. Right now, there are basically no prohibitions to mining in the region. There would also be a permanent prohibition on renewable energy development. And then one big difference is it would provide more opportunities for BLM to work with willing tribes. One, to help develop the land use management plan that will be required for the monument. And then the other is to implement that, whether that's by co-managing some of the lands or just providing input or whatever. So those are the key differences.
Okay. So can people go there now and see this, or is it pretty much closed off?
Oh, no. There are many routes that you can take. Now, many of them you need a 4x4. They are very sandy, very deep sand or rocky, so I wouldn't advise in just a regular vehicle. One place that I already mentioned that is accessible by a regular vehicle, it's a paved road, is Box Canyon, which drives through the western portion of the proposed monument. A lot of the areas are absolutely beautiful and stunning, but you would need a good probably 4x4, but for sure high clearance vehicle.
Well, speaking of off four-wheel drive vehicles, what about OHA vehicles? Will they be able to kind of go roaring through this place?
Well, there are a number of existing routes, official routes. They would not be allowed to drive cross country. They would have to stay on legal routes that are signed and on a map, that BLM puts together. And so we figure that's a good compromise. One, it can help protect the species. It can help protect the habitat, the cultural resources, the historical resources, by requiring people to stay on legal designated routes, but still allow people to go there, enjoy, camp, hike, watch birds, whatever, people like to do, botanize.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the activities that people really enjoy, given all of the rare plants in the area.
Right.
So it would definitely not be shut off.
Okay. So now let's get to this part here I want to talk about. And that is, it's up to the Biden administration to designate this national monument. How is that coming along? Are we close to having that happening yet? Or is there more? How is it going to take more work? What needs to be done?
Yes. So there are two ways for a national monument to get designated. One is through legislation. Although both Representative Ruiz and Senator Padilla have introduced legislation, we don't expect that legislation to go anywhere, given that Congress can't agree on the color of the sky at this moment. So there's absolutely no way that we would expect them to pass any legislation, much less legislation that provides for conservation. However, legislation is important because it can, and it does inform a presidential proclamation. So the president can look to that language to know what to include in a presidential proclamation. And so that's the second way. Through the Antiquities Act, the president can designate a national monument. And that is the route that we are proceeding on, because we believe that's our best chance of getting a national monument. We are hopeful that we can get that done this year. We are really hopeful that we can get that done before the election, because we know that folks will be awfully busy. But looking back, President Obama designated a number of monuments after the election, when on his way out. So if that's the case, that's okay too. But we're hoping sooner rather than later. As I mentioned, our next step is waiting for the BLM to have that public meeting, which we're hopeful will happen in the next couple of months. After that, it's just wait until we hear that they're willing to designate. During all this period, mind you, we're still working on gathering support. We are having tabling events. We are going to farmers markets. We are going to, every place we can think of to ask people to either sign a petition, if it's an individual, or meeting with electeds. We still have a number of cities that we're still working to get support from. So that will continue, and will continue until we hear that President Biden is actually going to sign the proclamation, and then we'll stop.
Now, when President Obama designated some lands, I was thinking specifically the Grand Escalante in Utah. Mm-hmm. Didn't President Trump undo a lot of his declarations of national monument land? And can't he do the same thing if Biden declares this a national monument?
Well, that's an interesting question. So first of all, if you recall, that administration did a number of things that were illegal. Yes, President Trump did take action to greatly decrease Bears Ears and Grand Staircase. There were lawsuits filed. A significant number of legal scholars believe that President Trump did not have the authority to do what he did. The lawsuits were winding their way through the court system. And then President Biden came into office and undid what President Trump did, basically, restoring everything to the way it was originally. And so the lawsuits were determined to be moot, and we never got an official answer from the courts. But like I said, a large number of legal scholars have provided opinions that say what President Trump did was not legal. And so we are extremely hopeful that these monuments will be a permanent, or this monument, will be a permanent designation, as well as, Bears Ears and Grand Staircase.
Well, I hope so too, but Trump doesn't seem to be concerned too much with what's legal and what's illegal. And I am concerned, of course, that the court decisions that you're talking about, with the new Supreme Court the way it is, that we could be into some real problems. So I think it's really important. I hope President Biden gets this done and signed and made into a national monument before the election. If he wins re-election, isn't going to be a problem. But if he doesn't, we got some problems.
Right. And unfortunately, a national monument designation will be only one of many, many problems for our public lands. Our everything, our air, our water, our everything that we hold dear and that is necessary for a good, healthy life. There were so many attacks on the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Water Act, just everything that, every good piece of legislation that has ever been enacted was attacked practically by the Trump administration.
And I'm afraid they would, if there's a second administration, I'm afraid it would get even worse. For an administration that denies climate change, they're not going to be paying any attention to the science behind what you're doing and why it's so important for the well-being of our land and our communities as well. It's just, I mean, it's really troubling. It's more than troubling. It's downright scary, because a lot of the work that you folks and other people like you have done, getting these lands protected, getting wildlife protected, could very well be undone. I'm scared about the Endangered Species Act under the Trump administration. I think they'll do away with it. I'm concerned about, of course, any of the climate change work that's been going on will come to an end, and we could see some really horrible things happening because of this, and the work that you're doing is so important. So, people every know I know I'm a very active in the Democratic Party, and as a Democrat, we are committed to seeing to it that our public lands are protected and expanded. And so the kind of work that Cal Wild is doing is the kind of work that needs to be done.
Well, thank you. And I mean, we've been around since 1976. And every time that we have a bad administration, we turn to defense. Sadly, the Trump administration, the last time around, was far worse than any Republican administration that we had ever dealt with before. And it was hard work and it was stressful work, being constantly on defense. But that's our plan again.
Yeah.
You know, if that's what we have to do for another 4 years.
Yeah, I think a second administration would be even worse, because now he knows more about how to sabotage things, and that's the whole thing. So we'll have to wait and see. That's why I'm working hard to reelect President Biden, and I hope there's a lot of other people out there. Here in California, it's probably a foregone conclusion, but there are states right next to us like Nevada and Arizona. If you know people in those states, you've got to get out there and start working. I intend to actually spend some time in Arizona for the few months before the election, seeing if we can make sure that Arizona votes Democratic again like it did in 2020 for Biden. Well, Linda, thank you so very much for taking the time to fill us in. I am so forward looking to learning more about Chuckwalla National Monument. I'm delighted to learn that it's going to protect Box Canyon and Painted Canyon, because those are just beautiful, beautiful areas that are very heavily used right now, and they need to be watched after and taken care of. So that's really good. Once again, I'd like to let everybody know, if you want to get hold of Linda, you can write her at lcastro@calwild.org. She'll be glad to answer any of your questions. Any last words you'd like to leave our listeners with, Linda?
If you haven't already, please go to protectchuckwalla.org to sign the petition. And please ask your friends and family to sign the petition as well.
You got it. Thank you so much. We'll get you back on in maybe half a year. And especially if it gets designated, we should have a big party here if we get Chuckwalla.
That sounds great.
Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
That was Linda Castro from Cal Wild on the proposed Chuckwalla National Monument. That's a beautiful area over there. I've gone through it a bunch, and really, if you've never driven through Box Canyon, and if you've never hiked the Painted Canyon Trail, you should do it. They're spectacular. They're spectacular. Okay, well, we're going to have to close out pretty soon here. Next week, I am not going to be here, so we're going to do a rerun of the show with Liz McDuffie, the little old cannabis lady from Pasadena. A fascinating show, a fascinating history, how she's taken everything from medical cannabis to recreational, and it's just seen to it that people have access to cannabis locally, safely, reliably, and affordably. She's an amazing person, Liz McDuffie. You don't want to miss that next week. And then the following week after that, we're going to have Michael Kravitz come on. He's the executive director of the Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access, and he's going to tell the untold story behind the recently changing of cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. You know, you haven't read all about it in the newspapers, what it has. So until then, thank you for joining us on Lanny Sense, the show that's beyond common sense. It is Lanny Sense.